we should start the session. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure and honor to open the session today of the molecular pathology workshop. The first speaker is our invited speaker. He is a professor of molecular pathology, Professor Sam Mary. He is from Greece, but most of his work conducted in Greece and England, UK. His specialty in logistics solutions to match pathology to the molecular diagnostics. Today, he will deliver to us a presentation about application and integration of the next generation sequencing in routine pathology. Sam, please.
Disclosures, forget about those, I won't contradict anyone. So I see a lot of data that comes out of Central Europe primarily, so we've done an analysis of large comprehensive cancer centres to get an understanding of how large they are, what type of material they have access to, and what they're doing in terms of next generation sequencing. So large comprehensive cancer centres in Europe are slightly different than yours, they're not so large in general. Typical labs would run these types of tests. So on your left would be the typical somatic mutations, and on your right would be the amplifications, loss of heterozygosity, and that type of thing. The panel testing that they do, or the types of tests they do in the past, have been one by one. And now with next generation sequencing, we hope we can multiplex these and do them simultaneously. Of course, average number of tests in large comprehensive cancer centres are quite large. So for example, in Manchester they do something like 12 to 15,000 diagnostic tests a year at molecular level. That covers all molecular genetics. And that's probably the second largest centre in the UK. You match that and go above it if you really become functional. So you have to be able to, in the next 10 years at least, be able to do everything here. Of course, what it costs, you all know the costs, we'll skip this. And there are a number of different devices, platforms that you could use. So you can use anything from a Roche system to an Ion Torrent, which I hear you have one now. That's very nice. Of course, the sequencing platforms all use very similar techniques. The technology behind the sequencing is actually devised by the same individual. Okay, it's just a modification of one platform over another, a different way of accessing the information, and slightly different chemistry up front. It makes a difference in terms of primarily if you want to do large-scale diagnostics or research, or you want to do low-scale, front-end clinical diagnostics, which is what you want to do. And it's a different thing, one playing against the other. So high throughput for one is not the same as high throughput for another. The chemistries, however, are different, and there are issues about which chemistries you can use cleanly and without issues. The high throughput ones, such as Illumina, are much easier to use because the chemistry is less hands-on. There are less issues in terms of what you will do on the bench. Okay. The lower end of scale, which is the Ion Torrent, which is completely flexible, is more hands-on, so you have more issues in terms of the quality of the material and the processing steps involved. And this is practically an issue in many labs at the moment. Okay. So as you know, the chemistry, you have three key components. First, you generate what's called your library, and then you have to put the library in a format that the machine can read it. And that's what you do by two different methods. One is emulsion PCR, which is the ion torrent, and the Illumina system uses bridging PCR, which is just a cleaner process, something slightly different. And then you have a whole complex set of different methods of actually accessing that data. Okay? So you can sequence by synthesis, you can sequence by ligation, you can pyrosequence, you can do other things as well. And it just depends on the device. This is all irrelevant to what we want to talk about. Okay? But not all diagnostic labs are comprehensive cancer centres, so you have to really scale down and think about what's practical for you. And the practicalities of most European labs is that they see about 200 to 250 cases that they would want to do next generation sequencing with per year. However, when you get down to low numbers, you have to match that with what you can do on your technology. So is it worth running individual tests for 200? Yes, it is. Is it more cost effective than next-gen sequencing? Well, yes, it is. So if you're at the low end of the scale, you have to stay with single test technology or small plex testing. If you have 50 tests per month, then you can start to think, and I'm saying you can start to think, not implement. Think about next generation sequencing. Because you have to cost benefit, not the cost of the test, but the cost to the patient in terms of time. It's not nice to have a test that you can run once a month on a next generation sequencing platform and run 25, 30 cases simultaneously, which is easy to do, but you can only do that once or twice a month if you have 50 cases. That means from day one to outcome of the test result, the patient waits 28 days approximately. Okay? Some are closer, but it's on average 28 days. Well, that's a month. And this is just not appropriate, for example, for lung cancer, where the treatment decision based on EGFR will be closed after 5 days because the clinician will just give them chemotherapy. And then you've lost your first line. And this happens in the UK, this happens in Central Europe. It's not affecting the Middle East, North African region at all. It affects us daily, that we see this in clinical routine practice, and we turn out results in 3 days. So it's just up to the clinician to learn what he can wait for and how long he has to wait. So if he's waiting in general for his pathology, which takes up to 2 or 3 weeks, and he's waiting another 3-4 days for a molecular test, it's okay. If they're combined and they get them simultaneously, then he can make his treatment decision much more effectively. Okay. So in terms of devices, and I've used this before, there are 3 simple devices you can use in a laboratory, okay, in a small laboratory or in a centre such as yours, Illumina, Torrent or Roche. And you have to think about, one, the chemistry, the cost of the device, and is it user-friendly? Can you use it and abuse it? Is a nice word, okay? Well, I put down run size, flexibility, the relative cost per test, and the design flexibility is 3 criteria. And those in blue are not good. Those in green are good. And what you really want is flexibility. Because 1 week you're going to have a lot of patients, so you want to run all of those simultaneously. The next week you have 3. Well, if you've already got a next generation sequencer, you probably don't have the other equipment that you would go around to do independent single testing. This is what many labs are doing. So if you really want to run it, you have to run it at a certain scale. Minimum number of samples per week that you want to run on, for example, an ion torrent, is probably 10 to 16. Because after that, it's not cost effective. Under that, I mean, if you run less samples, it's not really cost effective to do so. So the torrent, some of the people here will know, it just offers flexibility because it uses a small chip that changes size. So you can have a chip for 4 patients, a chip for 8 patients, or a chip for 16 patients. And it takes a little bit less time to run in terms of the amount of time it takes for the device to give you an output that you can then use the information from. You can do that in 3 or 4 hours. Okay? An Illumina system will give you 36 hours runtime. So when you switch it on, You just sit and wait for 36 hours before you get the data. This is not really what we want to be doing. Okay, forget that. That's what the device looks like, and as I said, it has small chips. You can see at the bottom. The P1, the Proton, has also got a P2 chip, and then there's a new version of that come out as well, which makes life a bit easier, so you can have a whole modular system that takes a lot of your hands off, but still got hands on. Can you sequence in a day? If you stay up all night, probably, but you're not going to do that. So really the workflow looks something like this, which is a little bit more complex. The good thing with this system is you have 3 QC checks through your run. So you make your library, you check it. You make your emulsion PCR, you check it. Okay? This is the next day. The third day, before you put it onto the sequencer, you also go through a QC check again to make sure that your libraries are actually functional and you've got enough of them there. Is it worth running this set of samples or not? The other systems don't have these checks. So it's a little bit more blind in terms of if the experiment works well in another device, it works. If it doesn't, you don't know until the end. And you spent that money and that time and those patients to get there. So that's not really cost effective for anybody. So that's why I think this was really the more user-friendly one. So sample extraction day 1, library preparation and enrichment day 2. That gets you a full day on your second day. Day 3, you can do your sequencing in like 2 hours, 3 hours. It's irrelevant in terms of time. But then you need to sit and analyze the data, and that's where the time takes. And the system allows you to actually quantify data very quickly, but really you don't want to spend less than 20 minutes on a case. So if you have 16 cases, there goes half your day. Okay? It's never simple to plug and play. I don't think that's what you found here either. You can't just switch it on and expect it to work day 1. Your time, your effort, and your experience will tell in terms of every step in the process. From DNA isolation, is this appropriate to go on the next-gen sequencing? Because not all samples are. You don't have enough DNA, it's not in the right format. Okay? And then sometimes they still fail, even though they look good. So at least the device gives you a sort of running input. It has a set of windows on it that you can see peripherally, and you can see how the device is running. So as you can see on the bottom of the chip, you can see a blue chip at the top, and then if you just go through the series like a keyboard 1, 2, 3, 4 to 9 in the orange. The orange is good. You've got complete coverage. You've covered all the wells. You're going to get a good result if the sequencing worked, if the experiment worked. On the first one, the blue ones at the top, the 2 blue ones at the top, no matter how good the experiment worked, you didn't load the chip. You're going to get no data. This is just time. So don't worry about it. You'll get better. Okay? Of course, you can see other parameters as you run through. You can see each individual case if you want as you run through, and you can see the size of the reads that you're getting returned to you from your experiment, so you get an idea on how good the data is and how good the experiment is running. However, by this time you've already put the samples in, so bye-bye, you're finished. Your experiment's done anyway if it didn't work. Okay. And then comes the complexity, and the real complexity is in the raw data and the bioinformatics. Now, thankfully, use the online systems. Use the systems that come from the companies. Don't think about buying anything else. It's not worth it, unless you're in a big facility, and you're not in a big facility, even in Cairo, at the NCI. The data set that you want out is going to be low compared to what you're putting in. Meaning, you're going to sequence either a specific panel that you design, which is a nice option, or you're just going to take a ready panel for which you're interested in 5 or 6 of those outputs, and you'll read those. You can ask the software, forget everybody else. All I want to read is these 6 genes. So you save time, you save effort, and you still get the result you're looking for. Okay. However, it is a hurdle in terms of thinking about larger panels or whole genome sequencing, for example. It's another field, but it's not specifically for you. So why NGS? Well, it's fairly simple. 11 genes by Sanger sequencing is 11 reads. Okay? No matter how many you run, the experiment for BRAF is one experiment. And what you get out at the end is one experiment. Now, if you did something wrong along the way and it didn't work too well, or the allelic frequency of the mutation is not very high, You may not see it. And this is also dependent on the other talks I'll give later in terms of the amount of material that you want to put in, what quality it is, how much neoplastic cell content you need in there, what the really content is, the real level of detection you're going to get out of these systems. These are all key factors before you do the experiment. But it makes it easier when you go into next gen, because now when you read the BRAF sequence, you read 1,000 experiments, 5,000 experiments from the same case. This is equivalent to 5,000 Sanger sequences. Okay. So now you can see the cutoffs. So that's why it's extremely important to be able to have this type of technology. Don't need to go on with that. What's available now? There's a set of, this is from Iron Torrent. This is the Life Technologies panels that they have on the left, cancer hotspots, RNA cancer panel, etc. There's a few coming. There's one for AML and there's another one for MDS, which is in the pipeline. And there's another 6 or 7 which will probably come out next year. So there'll be panels ready for you to use. You don't have to standardize. You don't have to think about anything else apart from, does this panel cover the expected experiment that I want to do? And the rest of the information that I get is not what I want. It doesn't matter. So the available panels for oncology at the moment, 22, 50 and 409 genes. And this is where it really screws me up, because I don't like this. I don't think there's 22 genes that we need. There's probably only 22 genes in oncology. There's not 409, because we can't do anything with them. So as I'm saying, think about the experiment and think what you're going to interpret, because you have to explain all of this to your clinician and your patient. And I don't know how you're going to do it, because we can't. And I know that they can't, but they try. So candidate biomarkers, not the ones which have any clinical utility yet, are about 12. You can see most of them. In lung, it's about a dozen. And in colorectal, it's a few less actually. So testing methodologies, if you look in the middle, panel testing, not complex. What I mean by not complex is, don't put too many genes in your experiment, either at the beginning, in the entire experiment that you run at NextGen, or in the data set you want to extract. Because if I extract data on 6 genes, I have to report on 6 genes. And I have no indication at all of how they interact. I don't know how NRAS interacts with BRAF in colorectal cancer, and I don't think anyone can tell me. But if you get a result for both of them, you have to give a clinical interpretation. Okay? So don't ask too much. Be very, very calm on what you're doing. It's nice to think we can get a lot of data, but it's not really useful. So if you look in the middle of core panel, you could run a few genes which you don't have to report on all of them, but it's a core panel that you can use for multiple tumor types, and then add something specific for lung, something specific for colon, something specific for melanoma, something specific for sarcoma, and you can batch these together. So the technology allows you to actually, at the beginning of the experiment, when you make your libraries, is to pool your libraries across the same patient. So for example, if you have a patient that you want just a core panel on colorectal, and on the next patient you want the colorectal panel plus another panel for some reason, you can match that in the same experiment. You need only run that patient once, you don't need to run them twice. You need to think about how the technology works and how you can do the chemistry, but it's possible. And of course you've got single gene on the left and you've got single gene on the right. The single gene on the left is what we all tend to do in the past, which is just PCR. Doesn't matter what the platform is. And on the right hand side is monitoring with new devices which will give you a result in 2 hours. And they exist. The typical workflow is the first primary concern is that the pathology is correct and you're testing the right sample for the right patient and the right indication, and you're using appropriate material for that test. You're using enough of it, and it has to have a certain neoplastic cell content and total cell content in terms of the amount of DNA that you expect to get from that material to run in the device. So although you think 10 nanograms is not a lot of material in terms of DNA or RNA for an experiment, which is not a lot, sometimes you don't recover that. And then your library preparation workflow is A, B, C, D, and then you need a simple 1-page report, please. I sit on the boards of the European Quality Assurers. We want one page, please. Because if you lose the second page, you've lost the whole result. Try and keep it as tight and concise as possible. And we know that it's getting more complex with next generation sequencing, but the page has two sides. It's better two-sided than 2 pages. Because if you lose this one, you may as well throw this one away. Okay? Just simple logistics in terms of how you want to give your data to somebody. Okay. CAP is also running programs for sequencing, so this will be available for everyone, as well as the EMQM and the UK NQS in the UK. So take-home messages, just to wrap up. At the moment, the global implementation for cancer diagnostics is about 2% using NGS. It doesn't cover the market at all, doesn't even influence it at any level at the moment, because there's so many other devices and tests out there. But be very careful that you're only giving data on actionable mutations. If I get a PIK3CA mutation in whichever tumor type, I have no clinical indication to give that information to anybody, because I don't know what to do with it. So although I may use it for something in terms of research, in terms of what we do within the department, or it's in your panel to do something else with, or you just want to add it because you cannot run less than, let's say, 15 genes in your panel, and you want to put a few extra in which are useful, don't give it to your patient because it's not clinically validated. It means nothing to anybody yet. You can't change the treatment decision. So be very careful what you're reporting out. Okay? That's standard. There are probably 15 genes for somatic mutations, as I say, and you can all read them off, you all know them. And there's probably 10 CNVs in terms of gene copy number, or CNVs, which are applicable for oncology today. They all fit in one panel, if you want. The clinical utility of a large panel, so for example, you can send your panel to the States and spend 5,000 euros to look at a patient and see whether an animal model or a cell line has responded to a certain chemotherapeutic regimen. By all means, if you can convince the patient, good luck. But I don't think that's actually the right thing to do. So we have to be careful. The information has to be relevant to both the clinician and the patient. And remember, we tend to talk to each other. You talk to the clinicians and the pathologists, talk to, the surgeons. We have this community that we work within. But really we're doing this for the patient, not for you. And the patient has the right to understand exactly what's on that piece of paper, because he has to take that somewhere else. Okay? And of course, for all of these things, for all of these extra mutations that we can identify and we can screen, there's no validation. And there's no way that we I also sit on the EQA board for molecular pathology, we don't have any availability of generating programs to make sure labs are giving the right result for these other genes. I can't run a program to test 409 genes. That means I need 409 different genetic mutations at least, probably something like 3,000 to cover those genes, in a cell line or in cell lines to test laboratories to make sure they're actually doing the job correctly. It's just not possible. So there's no way to validate it in terms of the diagnostic. Forget what you can do clinically, but even just diagnostically inside of a panel, I can't check it. As a single test, I can check it. As a multiplex, it's not possible. And of course, you need something like 50 cases a month before you even question, should we think about doing something with next-gen sequencing? As a clinical diagnostic test, not as a research. Research is something else. Okay? And I'll forget the rest. I'll leave you there, because we have some more in the afternoon and I think you should get up next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Miri. Any question?
Need a microphone.
Did you face any problems with working with?
Come on, yeah. You're speaking next anyway.
Yeah. Did you face any problems working with small sample sizes to uphold either biopsy?
Yes.
Or a full biopsy from the lung? Do you have this? Some Some problems?
We see the biggest problem with small biopsies, obviously, for many reasons. One, usually typically because they have a small percentage of neoplastic cell content, which is evident, and even if they have a high incidence of neoplastic cell content, it depends on the size of the biopsy. So if it's an FNB or it's something less than an FNB, meaning a biopsy, a fine needle biopsy, if it's a smear or if it's a cytology slide, you're back down to a low number of cells for which you're not sure of the allelic content in terms of the mutation. So now you have to think, I'm taking on average 10 nanograms of DNA to go into the experiment for next gen. I can use less, that's true. I can use probably 1 or 2 and get an equivalent result. But when you're at the lower end of the scheme in terms of recoverability of DNA to go into the experiment, one, you're unsure whether the experiment will work, and this occurs in about 70% of small biopsies have very low quantities of DNA when you extract them. Forget about RNA, it's even more complex. So the amount of DNA they extract from small biopsies in 60 to 70% of the cases, and this is for myself, this is for Milan, this is for Aris, wherever you ask, they'll tell you the same thing. We have issues in terms of the biopsies because we don't recover a lot of DNA. We still proceed with the experiment in many cases. However, the fail rate is something probably around 5 to 7%. It's not high, but that's because we do so many. And we have some flexibility in terms of understanding the material that will go into the experiment. So some of them we drop out because we automatically already know that these will not run. These are not going to give us enough material in terms of the number of quantity of read at the end. And of course, when you do the experiment, in the normal samples, you'll get your 1,000 reads, and in the low quantities, you might get 200 reads. So you start to question the data that you've got at the end, whether it's actually valid to give us a result. So in many of those cases, again, even though we've run the next gen, we just go back and do a single gene test.
But there's no way to judge from
There's no way to judge from the beginning at all. Not at all. And we see that also with large biopsies, that we also have 3, 4, 5% of large biopsies which give us virtually no DNA at all. And it's not what we'd expect. And it's got nothing to do with the technology of extraction. We can run that on multiple kits. We can run it in different devices. And we get the same. We just don't get quality DNA recovery.
And you recommend at the start to use the already available panels, not you recommend at the start to use the already available panel, and even if we got something different, it's not advisable to make our own panels at this stage, right?
I think for you at this point in time is just stick with panels that work. And then over time you'll get more comfortable with the technology. You'll get more comfortable with what samples are functioning, with the data reporting and the data analysis. You'll also feel, is your DNA good enough? Do I need to change the person who's extracting the DNA? It sounds really ridiculous, but some simple things work. It happens. And then go on and devise a small panel which works for you. And then you can take a bit of time to quantitate that and assess with the panel, that panel that you designed, replicates what you get in the other panel. So you'd have to do that anyway. You'd have to do that as part of your ISO, in terms of your standardization within the quality assurance networks for your laboratory. So if you have your own panel, you still have to make sure that it works. You have to prove it. It's not simple, I'll just go and do it. Okay? And of course, because you're designing it in a different way, you'll have a lot of help from the company. It's just the general utilization of that panel that comes out after that. We have 4 or 5 different panels that we run, but fortunately we can analyze across many specimens, so we get a better feel for it. And it will figure out for you. You'll work it out.
I think the question will be at the end of the session because of time limit. We have lunch at 2:30.
Lunch at 2:30.
The next speaker is Professor Abir Bahnasi, Professor of Molecular Pathology at the National Cancer Institute. She will deliver a talk on the profiling techniques in pathology from bench to clinic.
I will talk about something similar to Dr. Sam. It's profiling techniques in pathology. Yes, we already have next generation sequencing, but actually we do not have the experience yet. We have just worked with 10 cases. So we cannot present these cases today, but I will be talking in the next few minutes about the profiling techniques that we have been doing in the NCI in the passing years. So what's profiling? To start with, what's the definition of data profiling? Profiling is the studying of a set or sets of genes in a specific disease state or a specific pathway in a single experiment to have conclusion related to patient knowledge. This could be achieved through using analytical techniques for available data to develop a thorough knowledge of its content, structure, and quality and application. The aim of data profiling is to provide an overview regarding the change or the changes in a particular disease state or disease states in a certain group or groups of patients. Our final aim is to create a panel or panels that can be used to achieve accurate diagnosis or to improve our diagnostic accuracy and to enable us to add better classification and to predict response to treatment and survival rates and also to identify new targeted therapies. So there is a change in terms of diagnosis in the pathology lab. So it's not only the cell origin, morphology, or differentiation and grading that we care about now, but also we care about other things, including the genetic makeup of this case, this patient, the mutations available, the translocation available, and all these affect diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment. So the pathology lab is not as simple as before. We have to have all this cytology and histology, immunohistochemistry, what we call the morphological appearance of the morphological features of the patient. We have to have an immunophenotyping. We have to have diagnostic panels. And then we have to do cytogenetic and molecular genetic testing in most of the time. So today's cancer diagnostic lab should include all these. The one that I will stress upon during my talk is the genetic testing. So we have the cytogenetics and the molecular genetics, and under the molecular genetics we have many tests. Those involved in genotyping of specific mutation, either using PCR, RT-PCR, minimal residual disease monitoring, comparative genomic hybridization, single nucleotide polymorphism, LOH, gene expression profiling. All these data could be required for diagnosis of a certain case. And to start with, the earliest profiling techniques came with the comparative genomic hybridization, which replaced the conventional karyotyping. And in comparative genomic hybridization, we got chromosomal aberrations. We got an overview of all chromosomal aberrations involved in a case or in a sample of patient. We get information regarding the gains and the losses in chromosomal loci, regions, and subregions. Then came a great advances in DNA sequencing technology, starting from Sanger sequencing to next generation sequencing. And in this figure, we can see how much increase in using sequencing techniques happened from years 2001 till 2011. From the Sanger sequencing and the next generation sequencing. With increase in using these profiling technologies or sequencing technologies, there is also a decrease in the sequencing costs because more and more people start using profiling techniques, especially sequencing all over the world. Sequencing enabled us to reach conclusion or to get a panel of genetic aberration, either by mutations or polymorphisms. And we have a panel for colorectal, breast, prostate, lung, ovary, and melanoma. We can see that the mutations in the genes can either affect can either give us information regarding a target therapy that could be given to this patient instead of chemotherapy and have either, due to the presence of the mutation, either beneficial effect or inhibit the proper response to therapy, or it confers, it adds information regarding the toxicity that the patient can suffer while taking the regimen. So in colorectal cancer, we can see that UGT1A1 polymorphism can add to the toxicity of the patients, especially those having irinotecan. Whereas KRAS, BRAF, TP53, and PI3K, KRAS and BRAF can give information regarding patient response to the cetuximab, sorafenib, or else. The same for breast cancer, where we find that CYP2D6 affect patient response to tamoxifen, whereas PI3K and TP53 and P10 give information regarding the response of the patient to mTOR inhibitors. The same for EGFR, ALK, and ALK in lung cancer, where this the condition of the gene, whether there is a mutation or there is no mutation, can say, is this patient a proper candidate for taking certain drugs or not. And then came the era of the microarray technology, and the microarray technology, the great advance in microarray technology, or the achievement made in microarray technology was the MammaPrint, through which 70 gene signature can give information regarding patient response to treatment. Then I will discuss the NCI experience with molecular testing, which started at the early 90s till now. Most common relevant tumor types that we worked on at first, the bilharzia bladder cancer was our first interest or our priority, and since we had at this time a lot of cases of bilharzia bladder cancer, and it was a national health problem in Egypt. Then, due to campaign against bilharziasis, the incidence of bilharzia bladder cancer decreased dramatically, and now we are our national health problem is the hepatocellular carcinoma, HCV-associated hepatocellular carcinoma. So most of our work is focused now on hepatocellular carcinoma, breast cancer, mainly the triple negative versus the non-triple negative, the metastatic versus the non-metastatic, and the colorectal cancer. And in colorectal cancer, we are really interested about stage 2, which is increasing nowadays, and the early onset colorectal cancer, because we have a large portion of our cases coming before the age of 40. And we have also been working on metastatic versus non-metastatic. We are also having some profiling going on in lung cancer and mesothelioma. Regarding cytogenetics, conventional karyotyping for lymphomas, we have done a lot of conventional karyotyping for lymphomas in the 90s, leukemias, and some soft tissue and pediatric tumor. We have been doing spectral karyotyping and CGH also in the 90s, and we have detected a relevant chromosomal aberration at that time, which was characteristic to bilharzia bladder cancer, and this work has been done in cooperation with Stanley Manuel and others in the NIH, we found that in our bilharzia bladder cancer at that time, chromosome 9p, 1q, and 16, and chromosome Y were the driving force for the bilharzia bladder cancer. And then we start to use the Sanger sequencing and do sequencing for our cases. We start by doing small-scale work on P53 in bladder, breast, colon, and so on. We start by sequencing single gene for mutations and exon and end. Then we have sequencing. We have sequenced our breast cancer patient for BRCA1 and BRCA2, and we do full sequencing DNA analysis for these two genes. We have done 400 cases till now. 188 cases have positive family history, 150 without family history, and 62 cases actually they did not know whether they have a family history or not. We found that the frequency of mutation in our breast cancer cases was 25%, 43 out of the 100 cases with BRCA mutation have positive family history, and the differences between patients with group 2 with family history and group 1 without family history was statistically significant. For the BRCA testing, we had a panel, found a panel testing at 3 sites for 2 highly prevalent mutations in the BRCA, and we do full sequencing for the gene, and we sequenced the sites with relevant mutation. The most common mutations detected in our panel was similar to other studies that have been done outside Egypt. We have spliced sites in 501, about 28 non-sensitive mutation, 171 missensitive mutation, 113 insertion, 243 in deletion, interim deletion, and 112 deletions. We also sequenced for a microsatellite instability, and we sequenced 200 cases by using the Promiga kits for microsatellite instability detection, and we found that the majority of our cases, 37.5% have microsatellite instability low, 27.5% have microsatellites instability high, and 35 had microsatellite instability stable. Then we start a second project on lung cancer. We do EGFR mutation for lung cancer. We have 2 protocols on the lung cancer. The first one for EGFR mutation, ALK and KRAS mutation. The second is assessing for ALK break-apart by immune histochemistry and FISH technique. We assessed 100 cases for ALK break-apart. 14% of them were positive, and this frequency is dramatically higher than what has been reported outside in Europe and the United States, where the range is 4 and 7%. And we had a meeting where we discussed this, the data coming from Europe, Middle East, and North Africa regarding the ALK break-apart, and our data is actually higher. It's only Morocco that have the same high percentage. As for the EGFR mutation, we have 250 cases to be assessed for EGFR mutations. Up till now, we have assessed 34 cases. Then we have some work on microarray technology. What is microarray? It's a technique which permits direct analysis of messenger RNA, DNA expression levels for thousands of genes in a sample simultaneously using just one slide. And at that time, when we started using the microRNA, this was a breakthrough. For the pathologist, the biopathologist, the microarray preparation is as follows. We have a sample and we have a control, and then we do messenger RNA extraction for the sample and the control, and then we do the RT-PCR to get the cDNA. We label the sample by Cy5, and we label the control by Cy3, and we hybridize the sample and the control on the same slide, and then start to collect the data. At that time, it was a hell of work to get to analyze 40,000 gene or EST sites and to get the result. Of course, it's automated, but there should be an cooperation between the team who's doing the microarray to get the final results. The importance of the microarray is that it enables a very large number of genes, thousands, using a small sample, and it permits understanding how genes coordinate through the molecular functions and molecular pathways involved that gene are involved in, and it permits examination and the integration of gene expression and function at the cellular level. What are the types of microarray? We have the cDNA array, the oligonucleotide array, and the simplest and most recent, the real-time PCR array, in which we use a 96-well plate spotted for the gene or genes of interest, and just in a real-time PCR, we can get results of these 88 genes. This is one of our papers that has been published, the global gene expression profiles of Egyptian hepatocellular carcinoma associated with HCV genotype 4. In this manuscript or in this experiment, we have identified 958 differentially expressed genes between hepatocellular carcinoma patients and controls. 503 were upregulated and 455 were downregulated, and as you can see, these genes were involved in 65 pathways for the upregulated genes and involved in 59 pathways in the downregulated genes. And at the end, we had a panel of these genes, Notch1 and 4, PDK1, FGFR1, CD1B, IL7, RAF1, LELOVL2, IKPKG, PRKAB, ABCG2, and ABCB10. This panel of genes can differentiate between cases of hepatocellular carcinoma and other hepatic lesions, and we validate this sets on by immunohistochemistry on a larger or confirmatory set. At the end, we can see here the differentially expressed genes and expressed sequence tag site. As we can see, there is we can call a reversion in the pattern. If we look to the right side and the left side, we see that what's upregulated on the left side is actually downregulated on the right side, and what's upregulated on the left side is downregulated on the right side, left side down. And this shows the up and down regulated genes and their involvement in their molecular function and the different pathways. And this the result. All this come automatically out of the microarray. This is the result of the whole pathway scope involved in cases of hepatocellular carcinoma. Finally, we have to do verification, as I told you, on another set, and these are the results of the verification. It's almost the same. And then we try to assess whether the alpha-fetoprotein level in the patient have any implication in affecting the genetic profile in this particular case. And we find that cases with high alpha-fetoprotein have a completely different pattern than those with low alpha-fetoprotein. Then, speaking about the bladder cancer, we also assessed, at that time I said the bilharzia bladder cancer was our national health problem, so we assessed 20 transition cell carcinoma and 20 squamous cell carcinoma, bilharzia, and 3 undifferentiated carcinoma by microarray, and again we find that 10 genes that are the SOS1, HDAC2, and others can differentiate between the different types of bladder cancer. 516 genes were differentially overexpressed, 388 genes were differentially down-regulated, and these are the most frequently upregulated genes and the most frequently down-regulated genes in our bilharzia bladder cancer compared to the transitional cell carcinoma of the European part. Then we also examined breast cancer, metastatic versus non-metastatic, and again we can see the differentially up and down regulated gene, and we can see that there is a difference between the metastatic on the left side and non-metastatic on the right side. Then the real time, the era of